Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving into one of the shortest, but also one of the most personal and honestly riskiest letters in the entire New Testament. We're talking about the letter to Philemon. It is an absolutely powerful story packed into just a handful of words.
I mean, think about that for a second. This isn't just some ancient document. It's a high-stakes human drama. You've got a broken relationship, a potential death sentence on the line, and a radical appeal that could change absolutely everything. So let's get into it and unpack this incredible story. All right, first things first, we need to meet the key players in this drama. Their relationships are at the absolute heart of this whole situation. Okay, so on one side you have the Apostle Paul. He is a pretty big deal, but right now he's writing this from prison. He's sending the letter to a guy named Philemon, who's a wealthy leader in the church, and someone Paul personally brought to faith. But the person who really sets this whole story in motion, that's Onesimus. He is Philemon's slave, and he is on the run. And here is where it gets really complicated. Onesimus doesn't just run away. It's possible he also stole something from Philemon on his way out. He makes his way to Rome, and then in one of the craziest twists of fate, he meets Paul and becomes a Christian. Now, this puts Paul in a really tough spot. I mean, what do you do when a runaway slave is now also your brother in Christ? Now, to really feel the tension in this letter, we have to kind of step back into their world. The risks here were unbelievably high, and understanding the context is everything.
So, first, let's be clear about what this is. This isn't some huge theological essay. It's a deeply personal letter. Seriously, think of it more like reading someone's private email. It's about a very specific, very personal situation. And the fact that this little note made it into the Bible, that in itself is pretty amazing when you think about it.
This timeline helps put the pieces together. So, Philemon became a Christian years before this all went down. Now, fast forward to about AD 61. Paul is under house arrest in Rome, and that's where he has this chance encounter with Onesimus. Just imagine the courage it took for Paul to send Onesimus back, carrying this letter as his only shield. And to really understand the stakes, we have to talk about slavery in the Roman Empire. It was a brutal system, for sure, but it was different than what we might picture. It was mainly an economic institution, not a racial one. Slaves could even be doctors or teachers. But, and this is a huge but, running away was a massive crime. A runaway slave could be severely punished, even killed. This is literally the life-or-death situation Onesimus is walking back into. And this is where the story shifts from a risky situation into this beautiful demonstration of the gospel's power. Paul isn't just asking Philemon for a favor. He's calling him into a completely new reality. And here it is. This is the line that changes everything. Paul asks Philemon to welcome Onesimus back, not as property that ran away, but as a beloved brother. In their culture, that was an absolutely revolutionary, world-altering idea. It completely flips the script.
And that's the big idea humming underneath every word of this letter. Your identity in Christ is more real and more important than any social label. It doesn't matter if you're a master or a slave, a CEO or an intern. The gospel puts us all on the same level. And Paul does something incredible to illustrate this. He says to Philemon, look, if he owes you anything or wronged you, charge it to my account. Paul steps in to take the debt himself. And this is such a beautiful living picture of what Jesus does for us, right? He steps in and pays our spiritual debt to God, a debt we could never, ever pay on our own. So what's the big takeaway for us today? Well, the principles here are completely timeless. This letter challenges us to be people who forgive radically because we've been forgiven so much. It calls us to see other people not through the lens of their job title or social status, but through their identity in Christ. You know, at the foot of the cross, all those earthly hierarchies just melt away. We're all on level ground.
Okay, so last thing. Let's look at how Paul makes his case. Because he doesn't just make a request, he delivers an absolute masterclass in persuasion, and it's all wrapped in wisdom and love. Now, if you just glance at the structure, it seems pretty normal for a letter back then. You've got your hello, a little thanksgiving, the main point, and a goodbye. But don't let that fool you. Paul is incredibly strategic in how he uses this simple framework to build his case.
And this is so important. As an apostle, Paul had the authority to just order Philemon to forgive Onesimus. He even says, I could be bold and order you to do what you ought to do. But he doesn't.
Instead, he appeals to him based on love, respecting Philemon and giving him the space to make the right choice from his own heart. You can actually watch his brilliant strategy unfold. First, he builds rapport. He genuinely praises Philemon for his faith and love. Then he lays out the facts, explaining how Onesimus, whose name means useful, has now become truly useful to them both in Christ. He even offers to pay any debt. And finally, he makes this heartfelt emotional appeal, asking Philemon to do this for his sake, to refresh his heart. It's just a masterstroke of loving persuasion. And so, this tiny, ancient letter leaves us with a huge, modern challenge. If the gospel really redefines every single relationship, who in your life do you need to start seeing as more than their role? Not just as a coworker, or a neighbor, or a family member, but as a beloved brother or sister? That is the revolutionary question Philemon leaves ringing in our ears.